They say fear spreads like wildfire, but that night, something else did. Surrounded by enemies, outnumbered 100-1, the last human commander didn't scream. Didn't beg, he smiled. A single smile, quiet, defiant, and in that heartbeat every soldier around him stood taller. Every alien watching hesitated, because no algorithm, no logic in their cold machine minds could understand why a human would smile before death. What they didn't know was that smile wasn't surrender. It was a signal. A storm was coming. The night sky above Vathar Ridge was a graveyard of dying stars. What once had been a lush emerald world was now a scarred wasteland, split open by orbital bombardments, cracked like an eggshell under a hammer. Ash fell like slow snow, drifting over a battlefield that had not yet happened, but already smelled of death. The wind carried the metallic tang of burnt steel, mingled with the faint sweetness of blood and singed soil. Burned-out tanks lay half-buried in the mud like skeletons of extinct beasts. The blackened hulls of dropships protruded from the earth at odd angles, twisted, silent. Overhead, the sky was streaked by the red auroras of atmospheric interference, painting the horizon in crimson ribbons, like the world itself was bleeding. And in the center of that storm stood a man who refused to look away from the stars. Elias Ward, commander of the 7th Human Expeditionary Force, stood atop a jagged slab of ferrocrete, hands clasped behind his back, jaw clenched not in fear, but in stillness. His armor was scraped, dented, and scorched. A dark streak ran across his right cheek, not blood, but soot from a burning drone they'd downed hours earlier. He hadn't cleaned it off. It made him look almost inhuman, like a statue carved for war. Around him, the camp moved like a wounded organism. Medics whispered, boots crunched in the ash, muffled orders passed down trenches like dying breaths. What remained of his army, 18,042 soldiers, was preparing for the impossible, to stand against 2.4 million of the Korth. A hive-minded race with no concept of mercy, no word for retreat, no memory of losing. They would arrive at dawn, if dawn could still be called that here. Vathar Ridge hadn't seen a true sunrise in months. The alien bombardment had cracked the sky, shrouded the atmosphere in choking dust. The world lay in permanent twilight, neither day nor night. A perfect grave for humanity's last stand on this front. Elias's gaze stayed locked on a single star, or what was left of it. A faint blue pinprick shimmered between the shifting clouds of ash. It reminded him of Earth, not the Earth of now, burning and fractured across the colonial fronts, but the Earth of his childhood, oceans, wind, silence that didn't reek of war. Behind him, the trench lines stretched for kilometers. Floodlights were dimmed, buried under camo netting. Soldiers whispered their last jokes. Some prayed. Some carved names into the rifle stocks they'd never carry again. One woman played a harmonica so quietly the sound seemed like a ghost wandering through the night. No one shouted. No one begged. No one said we're going to win this. They all knew the truth, the math didn't lie. 18,000 against 2.4 million. But math had never understood humans. Captain Aaron, his second in command, climbed the ridge quietly. His boots crunched softly in the ash as he approached. He didn't salute. Protocol had died weeks ago, when command chains started collapsing like dominoes. He just stood beside Elias, staring at the same star. They'll be here in less than 6 hours, Aaron whispered. I know, Elias said simply. They've already breached the third perimeter. No reinforcements. No evacuation routes. We're alone. Elias nodded, and then after a moment Arun added with a brittle laugh, Hell of a way to go, huh? Elias didn't answer. Not because he didn't care, but because there was nothing left to say. The silence wasn't absence. It was full. Full of everything no words could hold. Fear, love, rage, acceptance, and something the aliens would never understand. Further down the trench, Private Kareem folded a piece of paper into a perfect square, then slid it into the pocket of his flak vest. It was a letter, for a son who would never read it. He whispered the first line one last time, eyes shut tight. If I don't come home, it's because I believe something was worth more than me. A few meters away, Corporal Alice O'Neill pressed a small silver pendant to her lips. She had stopped believing in God years ago after the fall of the Rim colonies, but tonight, the stars looked different. Or maybe she did. She didn't pray. She just closed her eyes and said softly, "Not luck. Someone wanted me to live this long." Nearby, a group of engineers worked in silence around a buried hatch, a relic of a time before the war. They weren't repairing weapons. They were reactivating something deeper, something only a handful of people, including Elias, knew existed beneath Vathar Ridge. A weapon not meant for victory but for finality. Above them, a long strip of black fabric fluttered weakly from a broken comms tower, the last human banner on Vathar. Torn, burned, but still flying. Elias descended from the slab slowly, his boots sinking into soft ash. As he walked the line, soldiers straightened unconsciously, not because he demanded it, because they needed it. His presence was quiet, but it was presence. He stopped at each squad. Sometimes he placed a hand on a shoulder. Sometimes he simply stood with them for a heartbeat before moving on. No speeches, no theatrics, just a man walking among those who had chosen to die standing. The aliens would never understand why this mattered. He reached the southern trench, where a group of young soldiers, barely out of training, huddled around a makeshift heater. They had duct-taped an old ration box into a small fire pit, feeding it with shreds of broken crates. Their laughter was too soft to be real, but it was laughter, human laughter. The sound felt like rebellion. When Elias approached, the laughter stopped. Not out of fear, but out of quiet respect. They watched their commander as though he were gravity itself. He didn't speak. He just let the silence sit with them. Then very slowly, he smiled, not a forced smile. Not bravado, just that small, quiet curve of the mouth that says, "I'm not afraid." And neither should you be. Something in their shoulders loosened. Someone exhaled. Someone else whispered, "Damn, he's still smiling." The moment passed like a warm wind through a frozen camp, but it was enough. The Korth didn't know it yet, but a single human smile was about to change the shape of the war. On the far horizon, the first tremors began. Not sound, vibration. The ground itself quivered as if holding its breath. The alien war engines were on the move, black silhouettes against the scarlet twilight like a tide of living night. No banners, no songs, just silence and marching. The Korth didn't need to roar. They let their numbers speak. Their vanguard stretched past the horizon. Towering biomechanical constructs moved like titans, their limbs folding with insect precision. Behind them, endless infantry, black-armored, faceless, perfectly in sync. No emotion, no doubt. They advanced the way a tsunami does, inevitable. Elias returned to the command bunker. It wasn't really a bunker anymore. Half the ceiling had collapsed in a previous strike and dust cascaded down every few minutes. A single holotable flickered in the center, projecting the enemy advance like a red wound crawling closer and closer. Aaron was already there, chewing on the end of a stim injector like it was a cigarette. "Still no transmissions from orbit?" Elias asked. Aaron shook his head. The Korth jammed everything beyond the upper atmosphere. "If the fleet's out there, they're not hearing us." "Good," Elias murmured. Aaron frowned. "Good?" Elias finally turned to look at him, and there was something strange in his eyes. Not despair, not madness, resolve. "We don't need anyone else to see this. Just them." Outside, another tremor rippled through the earth. A distant flare ignited the sky. The Korth probing artillery testing range. Elias walked over to the cracked viewport, staring at the black wave approaching. They don't understand, he thought. They think winning is just numbers. He allowed himself a slow breath, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the kind of breath soldiers take before pulling the last trigger. Somewhere deep beneath his boots, the fail-safe reactor, an old human secret buried long before this war began to hum. Hours slid by like oil on water. The alien army inched closer. Human lines tightened. The final night became a cocoon, heavy, suffocating, strangely calm. In the trenches, soldiers wrote their names in the dirt. Some kissed dog tags, some whispered earth lullabies. Not one deserted. Elias walked one last circuit through the camp before dawn, his armor streaked with ash, his boots dragging quiet lines in the dirt. The soldiers who saw him felt something they couldn't name. It wasn't hope. Hope belonged to fools and children. It was something older, harder, human. As the eastern horizon bled pale gray, He reached the highest ridge again. The alien army was a solid wall now, advancing like night-swallowing light. Elias Ward straightened his spine. His breath misted in the cold air. The wind tugged at the tattered banner above him, and then he smiled, a small, calm smile, a defiance the aliens could never comprehend. The storm had begun. They moved like a tide that had never known resistance. From orbit, the Korth invasion looked less like an army and more like a single, living organism, black and silver plates glinting faintly under the fractured light of Vathar's sky, moving in perfect, terrifying rhythm. From the horizon to the edge of the ridge, their formation stretched farther than human eyes could see. They didn't march with drums or banners. They marched with silence. For the Korth, silence was the language of dominance. Their mind wasn't split into individuals like humanity's fractured, chaotic consciousness. Every unit, from the smallest drone to the largest war engine, moved as one heartbeat pulsing through the hive mind. No emotion, no doubt. No need for courage. Courage is for creatures who fear. The Korth did not fear. At the heart of this tide, in a floating command sphere made of organic steel, stood Jarun. If stood could describe it at all. Its limbs were long, smooth, folded like an insect's, its torso rising like a column of dark glass. Its face, or rather the faceted mask where a human would have a face, reflected the battlefield below in countless mirrored fragments. It had no pupils, no expression. Emotion was inefficiency. Jarun did not look at Vathar Ridge. It absorbed it. Data poured through the hive net. Atmospheric density, troop locations, armor composition, heat signatures, probability matrices. 1,000 calculations ran simultaneously through its neural lattice. Victory probability, 99.99942%. This was not a war. This was a procedure. It opened a transmission thread into the collective. Thousands of alien soldiers kilometers apart paused their internal cycles and focused as one. Directive: exterminate human resistance at Vathar Ridge. Secondary directive: preserve planetary energy core. Estimated human collapse: 3.2 hours post-contact. No one questioned. No one wondered. No one even acknowledged. Questions were a human defect. The order simply became reality, and yet something was off. Jarun couldn't name it. Not because it lacked intelligence. Its cognitive lattice was capable of calculating planetary orbits to a hair's breadth, but because it lacked the concept. The noise was faint, like static in a perfect signal, but it was there, the humans. Their emotional field, erratic, unpredictable, pulsing with countless contradictions. Their soldiers radiated fear and fury and something else, not desperation, not surrender, defiance. Hive scan imagery replayed their faces along Jarun's mirrored mask. White eyes, bloodied armor, but not broken. There was something impossible in their stance, the way they looked up, even when staring into certain death. It triggered no danger response in the Korth. They didn't feel danger, but it triggered something far stranger: uncertainty. The swarm's vanguard reached the valley base by the second hour. Ground units fanned out in perfect concentric lines. Artillery beasts unfolded from their chrysalis pods. Biomechanical monstrosities that fused machine and flesh. Their elongated cannons swiveled upward like the necks of serpents, glowing faintly as they drew power. Drones filled the air in dark clouds, wings slicing the wind with a sound like knives on glass. Every formation moved in exact timing. A living clockwork, Jarun opened a sub-channel. Across the army, hundreds of millions of alien minds aligned with its frequency. They all felt what it felt. Not emotion, but clarity. Humans. They resist without reason. This is inefficient. Resistance is against probability. Probability will correct the error. For millennia, they had conquered without hesitation. No species had ever fought past the point of logical defeat. Some surrendered when defeat became evident. Others hid. A few fought, but always with the desperation of animals cornered. They broke cleanly. Humans, however, did something different. They didn't break. They burned. Jarun replayed a specific scan captured an hour earlier. A single human standing atop a shattered ridge, facing their endless swarm. That small, fragile creature in scorched armor. That stillness, and then that smile. Jarun did not understand smiles. The Korth had no mouths. Communication was neural and pure, efficient. Facial expression was irrelevant biological noise. But the human emotional signature that rippled from that smile, it registered, not as data, as interference. The hive lattice had no classification for it. Back in orbit, a relay ship scanned the human base's energy readings. No external reinforcement signals, no orbital escape trajectories, no nuclear signatures, no viable offensive counterstrike capability. In other words, cornered prey. And yet, their cortical thermal signatures remained stable, not collapsing, not panicking. Why? The Korth did not have why in their vocabulary. They had cause and effect. Every action had its logic. But here effect existed without cause. For a species built entirely on precision, this was like static under the skin. Jarun extended its consciousness down the chain into the minds of the frontline units. They stood at the edge of human trenches now. Silent, rows upon rows of black armor, reflective like water. The humans waited behind broken barricades, thin, meaningless lines compared to the alien tide. Through Korth eyes, the humans were flickering, fragile creatures. Sweat dripping, breath visible, hands trembling. Their armor dented, their numbers laughable. Statistical models predicted they would collapse at the first push. Probability remained 99.99%. But then something moved, not their weapons, not their defense lines. Their posture, they straightened, all at once, as if some invisible current passed through them. Jarun scanned their communications. No signal, no order, no rational trigger. And yet, like synchronized waves, the human emotional field rose, chaotic but aligned. The hive lattice received the readings like a foreign code it couldn't decrypt. For the first time in its long existence, Jarun felt something it didn't understand. Uncertainty. It accessed the historical conquest logs. Thousands of species, billions of battles. Never, never had a prey species smiled, their species surrendered. They screamed, they hid, they cursed the stars. Humans smiled. Jarun processed the concept from its archive. Shall we smile? A facial movement in humans associated with social bonding, joy, mockery, or defiance. Defiance. This word was tagged as strategic anomaly in 2 ancient skirmishes with human outposts. Small, insignificant events, but flagged nonetheless. Human resistance did not decrease with hopelessness. It intensified. Jarun narrowed its mirrored mask at the human commander's image. Why? The hive had no why. But the question echoed anyway. Below, the alien artillery units adjusted their aim. High-velocity plasma charges warmed. Drones began their low, predatory glide forward. The hive prepared for the first strike. Jarun observed. One of the human soldiers, a woman, her face smeared with ash, kissed a small piece of metal hanging around her neck. Another clenched a photo. Another lifted his rifle to his lips like a prayer. They were ritualizing death. Korth species archives had no equivalent behavior. Death was a null state, irrelevant. But for humans it meant something. Something powerful enough to reshape their actions even at the edge of extinction. Query. Meaning of human ritualization of death. Weir response, no available logical model. Query. Probability of unexpected tactical deviation. E-response rising. Jarun felt the shift ripple through the hive net like a cold wind. Not emotion, but a mathematical tremor. The commander unit calculated again. Victory probability, 99.998%. A microscopic drop, statistically irrelevant. Strategically, impossible. It tilted its faceted head toward the ridge. They're smiling, it whispered into the net. The words were not sound. The Korth never used sound, but the translation would have felt like a shiver down a human spine. The hive responded with silence. Illogical. Irrelevant. Please proceed. But something in Jarun hesitated. For the first time in Korth history, their perfect advance slowed by 0.04 seconds. Imperceptible to the human eye. Monumental to a hive that prided itself on perfect timing. That hesitation spread, not as panic, but as a ripple of delayed synchronization. A heartbeat too long, a step too slow, and on the ridge, Elias Ward noticed. He stood above his army, cloak torn, armor battered, and smiled wider. Jarun didn't understand why that smile felt like an attack. The wind picked up, carrying the distant whisper of a dying world. Ash swirled across the valley like black snow. The two armies faced each other in silence. On one side were the Korth, perfect, cold, infinite. On the other, humanity, fragile, broken, finite. And yet it was the infinite that hesitated, because the finite was smiling. Dawn never came on Vathar Ridge. The sky remained a fractured wound, leaking only the pale gray light of dust and the red shimmer of burning horizons. The air tasted like rust and fire, the taste of a world bleeding out. The valley below was a perfect mirror of death, an endless black sea of the Korth soldiers, shimmering like liquid obsidian. Their lines stretched as far as the eye could see, disciplined, silent, flawless. The hive's precision was a thing of brutal beauty. A single command and that tide would crash forward and drown humanity's last 18,042 defenders like sand beneath a wave. But atop the ridge, something was stirring beneath the surface. The ash trembled not from the Korth advance but from deep within the ground itself. Commander Elias Ward stood on the lip of the trench, arms folded behind his back, the wind tearing at the tattered banner above him. His soldiers waited below, heads lifted toward the enemy as though staring into the mouth of an ancient god. They did not pray for rescue. They did not cling to false hope. They waited for his signal. The Korth command sphere hovered silently above the valley floor, its black skin reflecting the skeletal ruins of the ridge. From within, Jarun observed every human heartbeat, every heat signature, every twitch of muscle. The hive's predictive lattice calculated their demise with a detached precision, but it could not calculate why Elias Ward was smiling. The alien commander had replayed that moment 17 times since the humans took their final positions. The curve of the lips, the steady eyes, the lack of trembling. No surrender flag, no transmission of terms. Just a man, framed against a broken sky, smiling. To the hive it was noise. To Elias it was a signal. Deep beneath Vathar Ridge, where forgotten tunnels snaked through bedrock and ancient dust, a pulse of light crawled along sealed conduits. Rusted bulkheads hummed awake like old gods stirring from slumber. One by one, darkened panels blinked with crimson halos. The air grew warmer, trembling with the low growl of something vast being reawakened. The failsafe reactor, a relic older than the war, older than most of the soldiers above gang, was coming back online. They called it Jericho Protocol, not a bomb, not a weapon. A message loud enough to shake a planet. Captain Aaron knelt by the old control panel, the flickering red light painting his face in shadows. His hands hovered over ancient analog switches, their labels half burned away. Engineers crouched around him, patching cables, bypassing dead circuits. The ground shook faintly as energy flowed upward. "You really think this thing will work?" Aaron whispered. Elias's voice came through the comm bead, calm as ever. "It will. It was built for this." Aaron laughed softly, the kind of laugh soldiers make when death feels close enough to taste. "And if it doesn't? Then at least they'll remember how we died." A beat of silence. Then Elias added quietly, "And maybe they'll understand why." Above ground, ash swirled around the trenches as the wind shifted. The Korth army began to move. Their vanguard advanced in perfect phalanx. 30,000 units in the first wave alone, black armor glinting like insect carapace. Heavy artillery constructs unfolded their limbs and aimed upward. The sound was like metal sighing, like the exhale of a machine god. Drones filled the sky in dense, seething clouds. The valley itself seemed to inhale. Jarun extended its consciousness like a net over the field. The hive was flawless. No hesitation remained. Probability, 99.998%, and yet, a tremor pulsed at the edge of its awareness. The human's emotional signatures were rising again. Like heat before a storm. Like something was building, they should have been trembling. They should have been breaking. They were aligning. Elias stepped down into the trench, passing through his soldiers without a word. He didn't need to speak. His presence was enough. A hand on a shoulder here, a nod there. Some soldiers whispered his name like a prayer. Some just breathed easier when he passed. He reached the central line where Private Kareem, the young father who had written the letter no one would ever read, stood gripping his rifle so tightly his knuckles were white. Elias met his gaze, no words, just a smile, and like a spark on dry grass, that small moment caught fire. Down the trench, Corporal Alice O'Neill lifted her pendant to her lips. Lieutenant Hughes muttered half a forgotten hymn. Someone whispered, "Not luck." Someone wanted us to be here, and something intangible moved through them all. A shared pulse. Invisible but undeniable. This was the human weapon the aliens had no word for. Resolve. The first alien artillery barrage screamed across the valley. Blue plasma shells split the air, lighting the sky with electric veins. The ground erupted in geysers of fire and mud, hurling earth and metal skyward. Entire segments of the trench vanished under the impact, the air filled with shockwaves and falling ash. Humans flinched, but they did not scatter. They dug deeper. Jarun watched the first wave strike. Its predictive lattice mapped the expected collapse of human formation. The collapse did not happen. Beneath the trench, Aaron slammed the final switch. The reactor roared to life. The sound was not a machine's hum. It was like a heartbeat amplified through the bones of the planet. Dust fell from the ceilings in sheets. A deep resonant pulse spread through the tunnels and outward into the ridge itself. Ancient warning glyphs lit the walls with a red glow, casting everything in a ghostly light. "Jericho is online," Aaron whispered. His hands were shaking, but not from fear, from the raw power vibrating through the ground. Elias closed his eyes briefly as the hum reached him. "Good." The Korth detected the energy surge almost instantly. Dozens of their sensor arrays turned toward the ridge, scanning for nuclear signatures, orbital uplinks, thermal weapons, but Jericho emitted none of those things. It wasn't broadcasting on any frequency they could understand. It wasn't a weapon they could measure. Jarun tilted its faceted head, running calculations in parallel. The human base was glowing with unknown energy patterns. But it wasn't offensive. It wasn't defensive either. It was alive. Query: unknown energy source classification. Response: undefined. The hive had no language for it, and then it heard something, not sound. Not in the physical sense, a pulse. A low, rhythmic beat echoing across the valley floor, through the ground, through the air, through the bones of every soldier. It wasn't electronic.
It wasn't mechanical.
It was something more primal, thump, thump, like a heart. The Korth soldiers paused mid-step. Their perfect synchronization stuttered again, a microscopic, measurable ripple. Or 4 seconds, then 0.07, then 0.02. Their march hesitated, and the humans felt it. Private Kareem was the first to raise his head. The pulse rattled through his boots, through his ribs, like the planet itself was breathing with them. It wasn't Jericho's machine they were feeling. It was each other. Every heartbeat amplified, shared, united. A grin cracked across his soot-streaked face. "They can feel it," he whispered. Corporal O'Neill looked up from her trench. "Good," she said, voice shaking with something between fear and fury. "Let them." And Elias Ward, commander soldier, the last man to hold the line, slowly climbed the ridge again. The ash whipped around him. Plasma fire scorched the ground to his left, and still. He climbed. Jarun focused every sensory array it had on him. The man stood there again, the same ridge, the same posture. His army bleeding behind him, his world burning around him, and he smiled. That impossible human smile, not born of victory, not of denial, but of something the hive could not comprehend. A choice. He knew he would die. And yet he smiled. Warning. Collective synchronization delay rising. Duk status deviation from optimal formation. And Jarun didn't feel. But its processors burned hotter. This shouldn't be happening. This wasn't in the lattice. This was illogical. Elias opened his mouth. He didn't need a microphone. The soldiers below already knew. "One signal," he whispered, "and we make history." Beneath him, Arun's voice came through the comms. "Jericho ready." Elias lifted his hand, palm open to the black ocean below. The pulse of the reactor matched the beating of their hearts. He whispered a final line, soft enough that only the wind heard. "Not luck. Not chance. Someone wanted us to stand here." And then he lowered his hand. The ridge answered. Jericho's pulse roared upward like a war drum from the bones of the world. The alien army froze for a fraction of a second. A fraction long enough for fear, that foreign corrosive concept, to brush the edge of their hive. And though they had no word for it, they felt it. For the first time in their long, cold history, the perfect hive faltered. The battlefield had grown silent, not because the fighting had ceased, but because both sides were holding their breath. The alien ships of Zyrathi hovered like obsidian vultures above the gray ruins of the once thriving human colony. Thick columns of black smoke coiled into the high atmosphere, twisting with the wind like mourning banners. Beneath that dark canopy, the human defensive lines lay fractured, yet unbroken. Trenches dug into scarred earth were now rivers of ash and blood, lit only by the pale fire of emergency lamps and the glow of distant bombardment. And in the center of that devastation, calm, upright, motionless as carved stone, stood Commander Reza Dan. The ground around him was cracked from the concussive strikes. Shell casings glittered faintly among the rubble, like forgotten stars. His face bore the grime of battle. The edges of his armor were scorched, but his eyes still carried the quiet fire of someone who refused to surrender the idea of humanity. The Zyrathi did not understand that fire. Their strategy was mathematical, cold, precise, inevitable. To them, morale was just another variable in a long equation of conquest. If they crushed the command structure, humans would fracture and collapse. That's how wars ended for most species, but humans were different. The night sky erupted as alien artillery hammered the last defense line. Metal screamed, men fell. Yet within those trenches something strange stirred. No one had spoken, but every soldier felt it. The commander's silent defiance pulsing through the chaos like a heartbeat. Major Sloan crawled closer, his arm bandaged and bloodied. "Sir, we're at 5% ammo reserves. They're bleeding us dry." Reza didn't look at him. His eyes were fixed on the alien formation, the way a wolf studies a circling predator. "Let them think they've won," he said softly. It wasn't a command. It was a whisper carried by the wind. Above, the aliens began tightening the ring, their massive carriers blocking out the few remaining stars. Through their neural hive link, they shared a collective surge of anticipation. Victory was a formality. The humans would break any moment now. But something was wrong. From their thermal scans, they could see that the humans weren't retreating. Their heart rates were rising, but not in panic. There was a pulse, a wave spreading from the center outward. It confused the Zyrathi tacticians. It wasn't fear. It wasn't fight or flight. It was resolve. The alien commander Zekral watched through the black glass of his command dome. "Why are they not running?" His voice hissed across the hive network. "Their chances are null." An analyst responded, "Unknown pattern. Emotional contagion detected. Unaligned with survival probability models." Zekral leaned closer. On the human command ridge, Reza Dan was standing tall. Blood on his jaw, a broken pauldron hanging loosely, his pulse steady. And then, Reza smiled. It wasn't a grin of arrogance. It wasn't desperation. It was something cleaner, warmer. A smile that said, "You may kill us, but you will never understand us." The wave hit like a silent explosion. The humans in the trenches, beaten and blood-soaked, saw that smile and straightened their backs. Fear cracked like a thin shell, their breaths synchronized. For the first time since the siege began, their gazes were sharp, not on the darkness around them, but on the man who refused to bow. To the Zyrathi, it was incomprehensible. Their culture had no word for dying with joy. Their logic faltered. Their advance slowed. Reza turned to his officers. "This is not the end," he said, almost as if he were talking to himself. "This is the beginning they'll remember." From the East Trench, Corporal Marin lifted her broken rifle and began humming, a soft melody from Earth's cradle. Another soldier joined, and then another. The song grew like a thread of light through shadow, a lullaby in the heart of war. Major Sloan's eyes burned as he whispered, "Sir, what are we doing?" Reza didn't answer with words. He raised his hand toward the alien fleet and tapped the communicator. Across every human frequency, his voice carried, steady, resonant, alive. "This is Commander Reza Dan. If you can hear me, stand." Across the ashlands, the scattered human units stirred like embers reigniting. Soldiers with shattered armor, medics with blood-streaked faces, pilots with no sky left to fly. They stood. The alien fleet recalibrated, trying to predict this deviation. None of their models accounted for hope. Zekral hissed again. "Their morale should be null. Why does it grow?" "Because," one analyst replied reluctantly, They are human. In that moment, the darkness trembled, not from weapons but from something far more dangerous. The humans didn't just prepare to die, they prepared to make their death count. Above the battlefield, hidden in the folds of the stratosphere, the contingency fleet waited. Reza's final card. A plan not meant to save them, but to change the war forever. And as the alien ships closed in for the kill, Commander Reza Dan lowered his hand, his smile unwavering, and whispered to the wind, "Now, let them come." The alien fleet descended with the precision of a closing fist. Their carriers, shaped like obsidian crescents, drifted into formation above the battlefield. One by one, their ventral cannons locked onto the last human position. They had calculated every possible outcome, every angle of retreat, every variable, except for the one now burning quietly in the heart of every human still breathing: faith in something beyond logic. Commander Reza Dan stood in the open, bathed in the pale glow of targeting lasers. Around him, the trench lines were shattered into jagged scars, yet the soldiers within them no longer cowered. They no longer feared the end. His smile had rewritten something in them, had whispered a language no alien program could translate. Above the clouds, cloaked in the cold silence of the upper atmosphere, something else waited. The alien intelligence hadn't detected it yet. A constellation of battered human stealth cruisers, remnants of the once mighty Earth Defense Armada, drifted in radio silence, wounded but awake. Their captains had been listening to Reza's broadcast. They had seen the smoke, heard the alien frequencies boasting of imminent victory, and yet they had also heard something else in his voice, something like a heartbeat. In the command trench, Major Sloan knelt beside the dying Corporal Marin, who still hummed that fragile Earth song, her voice thin as smoke. "She's still at it," he whispered. Reza didn't look back. "That song's older than this war," he said. "It was sung when humans had no ships, no colonies, when all they had was a fire and the will to live another night. That's the part they'll never understand." The Zirathi fleet unleashed its first volley. The sky screamed. White plasma fell like the wrath of a mechanical god. Impact after impact tore through the front lines, vaporizing steel and soil. Entire sections of trench folded in like broken ribs, and still the humans stood. The plasma storm roared, but it was met with silence. Not fear, not panic, just silence. A silence thick with something the aliens didn't know how to fight. Alien Commander Zakral watched through the dark pain of his warship. "Why aren't they breaking?" he hissed. "Why aren't they begging?" One of the analysts pulsed the Hive network with a confused signal. "We detect emotional synchronization. No centralized command structure should be capable of sustaining cohesion at this degradation level. They should be dead already." But humans didn't run on equations. A faint tremor rippled through the clouds above the alien formation. A single human cruiser decloaked for just half a second, long enough for Reza to see it with the naked eye. He didn't speak, but his smile deepened almost imperceptibly. The contingency fleet had seen the signal. It was time. He tapped the old brass coin in his pocket, a coin his father had given him when he joined the Defense Corps. The edges were worn smooth by years of war. On one side was a human starship. On the other, the engraving of a single word: endure. Reza closed his hand around it and whispered under his breath, "Not luck." Someone wanted me to live to this moment. The alien targeting grids locked fully, all plasma batteries charged for synchronized annihilation. And then, just as the storm was about to fall, something unexpected happened. A fire ignited. Not in the sky, in the dirt. In the middle of the blasted trenches, a group of soldiers lit their last emergency flares, not to signal surrender, but to burn light into darkness. One flare became three became dozens. In moments, the ruins of the battlefield were glowing like a field of ember-lit stars. To the Zirathi, it was meaningless, a primitive gesture. To humans, it was everything. "This is not the end," Reza murmured. His voice was low, but it carried. "This is the moment they remember what humanity is." He raised his hand slowly to the sky, the red light from the flares painting his armor like blood and dawn combined. Then the heavens answered. Dozens of human cruisers ripped through the cloak at once, their hulls streaking fire like falling angels. The alien sensor screamed too late. Human plasma bursts, kinetic slugs, and ion detonators cascaded downward like a storm reborn. The alien formation staggered, not because their weapons were inferior, but because their predictive logic broke. No human force should have attacked like this. No one was supposed to be left to fight back. But humans didn't wait for permission from probability. "All ships," Reza roared into the comms, his voice cutting through static and death alike. "Light them up." A volley unlike anything the aliens had prepared for tore into their carriers. Explosions unfolded like slow, fiery petals in the void. A cruiser on the human side shattered in return, but the soldiers below didn't flinch. Each death added weight to their defiance. In orbit, the Alien War Council pulsed with confusion. Their losses are catastrophic, an analyst broadcasted. Yet their will index is rising. Rising beyond projected containment levels. Zikral slammed a claw against the command sphere. Then they are not soldiers. "They are mad." "No," whispered a captured alien interpreter aboard one of the human ships, watching the red flare-strewn battlefield. "They are human." On the ground, flames reflected in Reza's eyes as he whispered, almost as a prayer, "Let the fire whisper to the stars." He lowered his hand. The ground quaked. The sky burned. Humanity roared, and the Zyrathi, for the first time in their long, calculated history, hesitated. The alien fleet was designed to crush civilizations without hesitation. Their battle doctrine had worked on 79 different species. When the fleet descended, civilizations collapsed, but not tonight. Not on this scorched battlefield. Not against humans. The sky was no longer theirs. Above the burning world, the Zyrathi formation twisted and stuttered as the first wave of human warships tore through their perfect geometry like shards of rebellion. Stealth frigates and scorched cruisers, patched together with steel and stubbornness, plunged into the heart of the invasion armada. They moved in patterns no AI would predict. Reckless, illogical, alive. Down on the ground, the alien cannons continued their barrage, but the rhythm was breaking. The synchronized pulse of the enemy faltered as human resistance surged back like a tide refusing to drown. Commander Reza Dan climbed onto the jagged edge of a ruined turret, his boots scraping against broken steel. Above him, the night burned red. Around him, soldiers clung to life in shattered trenches. Their bodies exhausted, their souls aflame. Major Sloan yelled over the comm. Voice cracked from smoke and shrapnel. "We've got friendlies in orbit. They're actually holding them." "Sir, they're holding the line." Reza's eyes tracked the black sky where streaks of fire cut through alien formations. "No," he said softly. "They're not holding the line. They're breaking their certainty." And that was exactly what was happening. The alien high command functioned on predictive war models. Precise, clinical, absolute. But human strategy didn't fit inside clean equations. One cruiser rammed straight into the belly of a carrier, detonating its engine core like a collapsing sun. Another frigate broke formation entirely, diving into plasma fire to open a blind spot for its wingmate. Tactically suicidal, logically meaningless, devastatingly effective. Zikral, the alien commander, leaned forward in the command dome. "This isn't a counterattack," he growled into the hive. "It's madness. They're burning themselves to destroy us." "Correction," pulsed an analyst through the network. "They are not burning themselves. They are choosing how to die." And that distinction, small as it seemed, shook the hive. In the trenches, Corporal Marin lay half buried under rubble, her song fading to a whisper, but others had picked it up. 100 throats, hoarse with blood and grit, carried the tune across the battlefield. It rose and fell like the beating of a single heart. Alien drones hovered at the edge of the human lines, their targeting optics confused. The humans weren't retreating or flanking or surrendering. They were standing and singing beneath a sky on fire. A young soldier named Evans stumbled to his feet, shoulder mangled, rifle long spent. He pressed his helmet to his brow and laughed through blood. "They don't get it, sir," he croaked. Reza glanced at him. "They think war's about living," Evans wheezed. "They've never seen humans fight when there's nothing left to lose." Reza placed a hand on his shoulder. Brief. Steady. Then turned his gaze upward again. From orbit came the soundless flash of a mothership tearing in two. The human fleet was paying in blood, but the aliens were paying in certainty. Every explosion was a whisper in their hive mind. "You are not invincible." On Zikral's command deck, alarms screeched across the black architecture. Reposition the subfleets, he snapped. They will break. They must break. But the analysts didn't answer immediately. Commander. One finally pulsed. Their emotional signature is escalating. It is not fear. It is not despair. It is something we cannot model. Zukral's claws scraped against the obsidian console. For the first time he felt something he couldn't name, something that burned colder than fear. On the ground, Reza turned to Sloan. Bring me the beacon, he ordered. Sloan hesitated. Sir, that's a one-way signal. Once we trigger it, they'll know our position. We'll be right under their guns. Reza's eyes never left the burning sky. We've always been under their guns. The difference is, now we're facing them. Sloan nodded and handed him the battered device. A cylindrical transmitter marked with old Earth sigils, half broken but still alive. Reza knelt and set the beacon into the blackened mud. He pressed the ignition key and a pulse of blue light shot upward like a spear of defiance. Instantly, alien scanners swiveled. They had found him. Z-Kral's command sphere zoomed in on the lone human commander beneath the beacon. Target him, he hissed. End this ridiculous fire. And yet something strange rippled through the hive. A cold, formless doubt. They had killed human commanders before. It had never changed the outcome. But this man, this smile, was different. Above, the human fleet pivoted their fire around the beacon. The battle shifted from chaos to purpose, every human vessel diving to shield that signal. Even the dying ones angled their last breaths toward it. Down below, in the mud, Reza lifted his head. Let's remind them, he whispered. What happens when humans stop fearing death? The storm descended. Alien plasma fell like a curtain of fire, hammering the trenches, burning everything in sight. Yet through the inferno, the beacon stood. Through the flames, the song did not die. Through the smoke, the commander did not kneel. And when the fire cleared, even the Zyrethi saw something they did not have a word for. Iron, flesh, faith, defiance. The storm had come, and humanity was still standing. The horizon bled gold as the last of the alien night retreated. But the light that washed over the broken plains was not the sun's alone. High above the scarred valley, the dawn engine hummed, its radiant core swelling with energy like a star trapped in a cage of bone and steel. The alien structure, neither purely mechanical nor organic, pulsed with a rhythm that felt disturbingly alive. Below it, the human army stood like ink stains upon a blazing canvas. Mud-caked armor, cracked helmets, scorched banners, the remnants of the Terran Expeditionary Force had gathered for one last push. The war had dragged across 17 campaigns, 6 worlds, and the graves of millions. But this was the heart of it all. Captain Arlen Thorne raised his visor and stared at the impossible monument. It towered like a god's ribcage, built by hands that had lived and died before humankind ever discovered fire. Inside that engine was the resonant core, a lattice of alien light capable of rewriting the fabric of planetary ecosystems, or burning them into ash. He tightened the strap on his gauntlet. The last order he had received from High Command was simple: secure the core, end the war. But in the eyes of his soldiers, that order translated to something else: survive the impossible. The sky cracked open with the arrival of the enemy fleet. Needle-like vessels sliced through the atmosphere, dragging screaming thunder behind them. The Cathari sovereignty had arrived to defend their relic, not as conquerors now, but as a wounded animal ready to tear flesh with its last breath. Arlen felt the ground tremble beneath the pounding of their landing pylons. The blood before the dawn, the valley erupted. Plasma fire streaked across the battlefield in jagged arcs, lighting up the dawn like a hell-born aurora. Shards of kinetic artillery plowed through armored lines, sending bodies and soil skyward in one hideous ballet. The screams of men and aliens blended into a single seamless roar. Colonel Osei's mechanized battalion advanced along the flanks, their walkers moving with the slow, deliberate grace of ancient war gods. Human infantry followed behind like shadows, ducking through the fog of ionized dust. Every meter gained was carved from death itself. Above the chaos, the dawn engine flared. For the first time since their arrival, the human scanners recorded something strange. The core's resonance frequency was rising exponentially. It was reacting to the bloodshed, feeding on it. The awakening, deep within the structure, unseen mechanisms stirred. The engine was not just a weapon. It was a judge. Millennia ago, the Cathari had bound their entire civilization to this artifact. It was a machine designed to test worth. Only those who could endure the fires of annihilation were deemed worthy to inherit the stars. Now, humanity's war had awakened its ancient protocols. In the command trench, data streams crackled across hollow screens. "Captain, the core is emitting harmonics beyond our predictive models," Tech Officer Ron barked, sweat carving lines through the dust on his face. "If it reaches critical amplitude, it could detonate the entire continental plate." Arlen's eyes hardened. "Then we get to it first," but there was something else. The engine wasn't just reacting to death, it was listening. The resonance formed patterns, whispers carried on frequencies too low for the ear. But Arlen felt them beneath his skin like a heartbeat, not his own. A single phrase repeated over and over in the data stream. "Prove the dawn." Into the engine, Arlen led the infiltration squad through the storm of plasma and steel. They cut their way into the engine's outer hull, where organic matter fused with titanium bones. The interior pulsed with a wet, rhythmic glow, like being inside the lungs of a sleeping titan. The squad advanced in silence. Their boots splashed in shallow pools of luminous fluid. Shadows moved in the walls, not mechanical, not alive, but something in between. The air smelled of ozone and burnt copper. Corporal Vega whispered over comms. "Feels like it's watching us." "It is," Arlen replied without hesitation. At the heart of the chamber, a colossal sphere rotated slowly, its surface engraved with alien runes that shimmered like flowing mercury. This was the resonant core. If detonated, it would either terraform the planet or rip its mantle apart, but they were not alone. From the shadows, Cathari sentinels emerged, tall, spined creatures wielding blade rifles that hissed with energy. Their armor was etched with ceremonial symbols, their movements as fluid as predators circling prey. Vega raised his rifle, but Arlen lifted a hand. Something inside him understood what the engine demanded. This wasn't just about brute force anymore. The trial, the sentinels didn't fire. Instead, they circled the humans, dragging their weapons against the floor, a metallic dirge that vibrated through the chamber. The core's glow intensified, throwing shards of light across the walls. A figure emerged from behind the sentinels, a Cathari high custodian, its body wrapped in shimmering armor like liquid night. Its voice resonated inside Arlen's skull rather than his ears. "The blood is spoken. The trial begins. Prove the dawn or all shall burn." Suddenly the walls twisted, reality bent like fabric. The soldiers found themselves standing not in the engine, but in a vast void of light and storm. Memories, fears, and rage bled into one another. Each human soldier was isolated in their own crucible, facing visions that clawed at their sanity. Arlen saw his home, burned away during the first invasion. He saw his sister screaming beneath alien fire, and he saw himself, a commander who had led thousands to their deaths. The engine was not testing their strength. It was testing their soul. The breaking point outside, the battle raged on. Thousands died every minute, and the core drank it all. The frequency climbed past stable limits. If the trial failed, the engine would collapse into a singularity. Inside, Arlen knelt in the void, trembling as the weight of every order he'd ever given crushed down on him. His pulse roared in his ears. His breath came in shuddering bursts. But then, he heard something else. Not the whispers of the engine, but the voices of his people, his soldiers. They were still fighting, bleeding, believing. "Prove the dawn." The phrase no longer sounded alien. It sounded human. Arlen rose. The answer. He reached into the void and spoke, not in defiance, but in conviction. "We are not here to inherit your dawn," he said. "We are here to forge our own." The core responded like a living thing awakened from sleep. The vision shattered like glass. The chamber returned. The sentinels froze in place. Light burst from the core, spiraling through the structure like veins of a newborn star. The engine had its answer. But dawn has a price. Alarms flared. Rain's voice broke through comms, panic laced with static. "Captain, it's choosing us, but it's overloading. If we don't regulate it, the energy spike will incinerate everything within 100 kilometers. The core's power wasn't meant for mortals. To stabilize it, someone would have to stay behind and merge with the lattice, to become part of the engine itself." Arlen looked at Vega. Vega shook his head violently. "No, don't you dare," Arlen smiled faintly. This isn't about one man. It's about Dawn. He stepped forward. The chamber erupted in a brilliant surge of gold. The first light of dawn split the sky like a blade. But it wasn't sunlight. It was the Dawn engine, alive and screaming. The colossal structure that had slept beneath alien stars for millennia now burned like a captive sun. Columns of golden fire rose toward the heavens, twisting and spiraling into a storm that tore clouds apart. The ground cracked open in jagged veins, bleeding molten light. The world was being remade, or destroyed. Captain Arlen Thorne stood at the center of the core chamber, his armor half-melted, his body locked in a lattice of radiant energy. The resonant core had accepted humanity's answer, but the cost was far greater than anyone expected. The engine demanded more than blood. It demanded a soul to anchor its rebirth. Arlen felt the machine inside his veins. The alien energy slithered through his neural pathways, mapping every thought, every regret, every flicker of will. He was no longer simply human. He was becoming a bridge between two civilizations, human and Cathari, between the old universe and the one being born in this furnace. Outside, the battle had ceased. The Cathari and human soldiers stared upward as the sky bloomed with impossible light. Weapons hung forgotten. The engine's voice filled every mind, regardless of race or language. Dawn must be chosen. The abyss beneath the light deep under the engine, tectonic plates groaned. The surge of energy had awakened something older than the war itself. The abyssal core, a singularity buried in the planet's mantle, a failsafe to annihilate the world if the trial was failed, or corrupted. The golden light flickered with shadows. Energy spikes lanced into the upper atmosphere, burning holes through orbiting ships. Communications were jammed. The planet was no longer a battleground. It had become the trial's final crucible. Rane's voice came through static. "Captain, the engine's going critical. It's fusing your neural signature with the core. If we don't cut it off, you're—" Arlen clenched his fists, and the engine responded to him like muscle to bone. He wasn't trapped. He was in command. "No," he said quietly. "We finish this." The communion, the Cathari High Custodian, approached the dais. Its obsidian armor dripped with light like liquid night. Where once its eyes held cold hatred, now they burned with something else, reverence or fear. "You carry the burden of the dawn," its voice echoed in Arlen's mind. "No one survives it, not even us." "Then help me," Arlen answered. "If this is your god, teach me how to stop it." The custodian extended a long, clawed hand and placed it upon the core beside him. For the first time in the war, a human and a Cathari shared a single pulse. Their minds intertwined with the engine, their memories flashing like lightning. Arlen saw the Cathari homeworld, once green, vibrant, and alive. He saw their first trial, and their failure. He saw entire continents burned to glass because they were too proud to choose unity over dominance. And in that shared pain, the engine stirred. It didn't want obedience. It wanted transcendence. The choice, outside the chamber, the human forces, and the Cathari Legion, had formed an uneasy ring. The dawn storm howled around them, peeling away ships, tearing stone from mountains. Every heartbeat felt like the last. Colonel Osei shouted over the comms, "We can evacuate the fleet if you give us the signal, Captain. We'll abandon the planet." But Arlen knew there was no planet to abandon. If the abyssal core detonated, the shockwave would spread through the wormhole lattice. The entire sector would burn. The engine's voice filled his skull, low and resonant. "One will fall. All will rise." It showed him two futures. In one, he released control. The engine collapsed. A singularity consumed everything. In the other, he became the core. The world survived. Humanity would inherit the engine's power, but his consciousness would never return. The hand extended. The custodian turned to him. "We spent centuries refusing to pay the price. That is why we died. But you, human, you would burn alone." Arlen looked through the engine's veil and saw the faces of his soldiers. Vega, Rane, Osei, all those who followed him across star systems. He saw Earth, not as it was, but as it could be. The engine pulsed beneath his skin like a second heart. "No," he whispered, "we won't burn alone." He reached out, not to the engine, but to the custodian. And slowly, the alien grasped his hand. For the first time in history, human and Cathari merged their essence into the core together. The birth of the new dawn. The resonant core erupted in silence. No sound, no heat. Just a wave of light so pure it stripped war itself from the battlefield. The engine stabilized. The abyssal core folded in on itself, then went still. The storm vanished, leaving behind a quiet sky split open by a new star. The energy surge threaded into orbit, stabilizing the planet's shattered magnetic field. And at the heart of it all, Arlen and the custodian stood no more. Their bodies were gone. Their minds had become something greater. A living lattice of memory and light that would guide the planet's rebirth. The engine whispered across every frequency. Dawn has been proven. The silence. After, when the light finally dimmed, the battlefield was no longer divided. Human and Cathari soldiers stood side by side, their armor scorched, their faces streaked with ash and wonder. Colonel Osei lowered his rifle. So did the alien warlord. For the first time in centuries, there was no enemy. In orbit, fleet captains reported that the engine's energy signature was broadcasting something strange. Not a weapon, but a beacon. A call to every star system. A new dawn is rising. The sun rose on a silent battlefield. No gunfire, no war cries, no fleet engines. Just the quiet breath of a world that had survived its own ending. Where once rivers of molten light tore through the land, now they glimmered like veins of gold, cooling slowly under the pale warmth of the real dawn. Smoke curled from the skeletons of ships, human and Cathari alike, twisted together in a single graveyard. For the first time in living memory, the horizon was not broken by burning skies. Commander Vega walked among the ruins with slow, deliberate steps. Her boots sank into blackened soil, still warm from the engine's fire. Around her, soldiers who only hours ago had fought to the death now stood side by side. Human, Cathari, breathing the same air, sharing the same silence. No treaties were signed. No flags were raised. Peace, fragile as the ash that coated the ground, had not been declared. It had simply arrived. Echoes of a name. Someone whispered his name. Arlen. The sound rippled through the crowd like a thread of smoke. Every soldier, every captain, every alien warrior who'd faced the storm knew what had been given. One man had held the abyss and chosen light. The dawn engine had stilled. Its impossible glow condensed into a hovering lattice above the core. Within it, fractal patterns pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like a heart. Vega approached the engine's edge. Her gloved hand hovered above the shimmering field. When her fingers brushed it, 1,000 memories burst behind her eyes. She saw Arlen, not as he died, but as he became. His last breath wasn't a scream. It was a quiet exhale that carried the world forward. She fell to one knee, not in grief, but in awe. "You stubborn fool," she whispered. "You did it." Behind her, the Cathari High Custodian's armor cracked open like ancient stone shedding its weight. It knelt too, not to Vega, not to any flag, but to the memory that lingered in the engine's pulse. The burial of guns, the dead stretched for miles. Human corpses, alien shells, broken machines. The air was thick with the iron taste of war's aftermath, and yet no one burned the bodies separately. A decision had been made without words. The burial ground would not carry flags or species markers. It would carry names. For 3 days and nights, the survivors carried the fallen. Human soldiers wrapped alien bodies. Cathari warriors lifted human dead with care. They stacked weapons in great iron pyres, rifles, railguns, plasma lances, then lit them with a single spark. The fire rose high, but this time it was not a fire of war. It was the kind that warms, not destroys. Colonel Osei stood by the pyre and spoke into the wind. They fought as enemies. They died as witnesses. And today they will rest together beneath the same sky. The seed of doubt, but not everyone saw hope in the dawn. In the shadows of the wreckage, Lieutenant Harrow watched the mingling of human and Cathari with clenched fists. He had lost his entire unit. To him, the aliens were not survivors. They were murderers. This isn't peace, he whispered to himself. This is forgetting. Others shared his silence. Some humans turned their backs when Cathari carried their wounded. Some aliens spat when the humans spoke of rebuilding. The dawn had burned away war, but the ashes still held old hate. And in those ashes, new seeds, dangerous, bitter, began to stir. The voice in the lattice that night. When the stars returned to the sky for the first time without fire, the engine whispered. Not in words, in feeling. Vega awoke in her tent, breathless. A warm hum echoed in her skull, a heartbeat that wasn't hers. She rushed to the engine's core where golden light pulsed like a sleeping sun. Dozens of soldiers and aliens were already gathered, drawn by the same silent call. Then the engine spoke. The dawn remembers. The voice was neither human nor alien. It was Arlen. The survivors fell to silence as his echo washed over them. I see you, all of you, not as enemies, as what we were meant to be. Keep this world alive, or it will return to me. And then, like the last breath of a dying star, the lattice dimmed to a faint ember. Some fell to their knees in reverence. Others turned away, unsettled. The Cathari High Custodian lifted its face to the stars and whispered something in its native tongue. A prayer. Or perhaps a promise. A world in the making weeks passed. The battlefield became a city of tents, then of stone. Engineers rebuilt using what remained of human alloy and alien crystal. Out of wreckage, something strange was forming. Not a colony, not an empire, something new. A council of survivors was established. No species had more power than another. Its first law was carved into the engine's base. The dawn is not owned. It is guarded. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Harrow's whispers spread like cracks beneath polished stone. Not everyone wanted to live beside those who had slaughtered their families. Not every alien was ready to kneel before a human-made dawn. And far above, fragments of the destroyed fleet still drifted in orbit, like vultures circling a newborn, the coming shadow in the cold of night. Vega stood alone atop a hill overlooking the reborn plains. The wind carried ash and the scent of burned steel. Her hand rested on the pulse blade at her hip, not in fear but in habit. We won the war, she murmured to the dark. But peace is a harder enemy. The wind shifted and the engine's golden light flickered in the distance like a heartbeat too fragile to trust. She remembered Arlen's last smile, not as a goodbye but as a warning because light always casts a shadow. And shadows were already moving. The dawn was never meant to last forever. For weeks the survivors believed they had won. The guns were buried. The skies had cleared. The great engine pulsed like a sleeping sun above the plains, a quiet heartbeat that held the world together. But beneath that fragile peace, the cracks had already begun to spread, not across the land, across hearts. Ash and the blood Lieutenant Harrow walked the edge of the burial grounds, boots crunching against brittle ash. The scent of scorched earth still clung to everything here, even the living. He stared at the mixed graves where humans and Cathari lay together, unmarked, indistinguishable. To him, it wasn't unity. It was erasure. We bled for this world, he muttered under his breath. They burned it. A dozen figures stood behind him. Survivors like him, soldiers, engineers, wanderers, all scarred by the war in ways that peace could not heal. They wore no uniforms, but they carried weapons. Not raised, not yet, just remembered. A shadowy wind swept across the field, scattering ash into the air. In the distance, the engine pulsed once, faint, irregular, like a heartbeat beginning to stutter. The council fractures inside the half-finished council chamber, tension hung thick as smoke. Humans and Cathari faced one another across a long stone table, carved from the ruins of warships. Golden light from the engine seeped through cracked walls, illuminating faces etched with distrust. Colonel Vega stood at the head of the table. She'd worn command-like armor since Arlen's sacrifice, but tonight even steel felt thin. Rations are low, she said. The Cathari vaults have food reserves we can share across districts. The Cathari custodian inclined its narrow head. We will not starve them, but neither will we feed those who still carry fire in their hands. A ripple of angry murmurs from the human delegates. Harrow's allies had begun to infiltrate the council, their whispers soft but their intentions sharp. We're supposed to rebuild together, Vega snapped. Not divide into sides again. Sides never disappeared, one human replied coldly. You just pretended they did. The chamber fell silent. A storm was coming, not of metal or fire, but of memory. The fading light, the engine's light began to dim on the 10th night. No warning, no signal. One moment it shone golden, soft and constant. The next it flickered like a failing star. The pulse that once echoed through every mind, human and alien alike, went irregular, skipping beats, whispering strange, fractured fragments. The dawn remembers. Vega ran to the core chamber, followed by Cathari engineers and frightened soldiers. The lattice that once held Arlen's echo now shivered violently, like glass under pressure. What's happening? Vega barked. The alien technics worked their consoles, but their movements were panicked. The lattice is destabilizing. Its anchor is faltering. Arlen's voice had been the stabilizer. His sacrifice had become the heart of this fragile world. But now, like a ghost fading at sunrise, that voice was slipping away, and in its place, something else began to whisper. Whispers in the ash that night. Harrow's followers gathered at the outskirts of the rebuilt city. No light, no banners. Only silence and weapons hidden beneath cloaks. A Cathari convoy passed along the ridge, carrying engine shards to the core for maintenance. These shards were not just machinery. They were living pieces of the dawn itself. To those who worshipped the engine, they were sacred. To Harrow, they were leverage. One spark, he said softly. One spark and the illusion dies. The first shot was silent. The convoy fell, and with it the world tilted. Golden shards scattered into the dirt like fallen stars. The hum of the engine faltered again, lower this time, as though the heartbeat itself felt pain. Harrow knelt beside a shard, its light flickering against his face. We gave everything, he whispered, and they gave us this lie. The echo returns. Vega's sleep broke at the sound. A whisper, not in her ears, but in her mind. Vega! She bolted upright, heart hammering. It was him. Arlen. But not as he was before. The voice came in pieces, fragmented, stretched thin across the engine's dying pulse. They're coming inside. She rushed to the engine core, her breath tearing through the cold air. And then she felt it, the shadow beneath the light. Something was moving through the engine. Not Harrow, not alien, something older. Something that had waited for cracks to form. For the first time since the war ended, Vega felt fear. The shatter point. The next dawn rose weak and gray. Smoke drifted where the convoy had burned. The council was in uproar. Cathari demanded justice. Humans whispered about rebellion. And overhead the engine pulsed like a wounded animal. This isn't just rebellion, Vega told Ose, her voice hoarse. Something's pushing through the cracks. Arlen tried to warn me. Ose's gaze hardened. Then we're standing on a fault line, and it's about to break. In the distance, a second explosion rippled across the horizon. Harrow's insurgents struck again, this time not for shards, but for control. The engine wailed. The golden sky began to fracture with streaks of black. The same storm that had ended the war was beginning again. Only now, it wasn't alien versus human. It was humanity against itself. The shadow awakens deep beneath the core chamber where the abyssal lattice once slept. An ancient hum stirred. Not of Arlen, not of dawn, of the abyss. The very force that Arlen had contained with his sacrifice was now bleeding through the fractures. What was once defeated had merely waited, and as the golden light of the engine faltered, a cold voice, sharp as razors, whispered through the sleeping city. Dawn dies. Night remembers. The dawn was breaking, but so was the world. The engine's light, once a radiant promise, now flickered like a dying star. Black fractures veined through its core, spilling a void dark mist that crawled across the sky. The planes were silent except for the low, terrible hum of something waking beneath the surface. The abyssal core Arlen once held back with his soul. In the dark beneath the engine, the final battle was waiting to be born. The betrayal made Flesh Lieutenant Harrow's insurgents had gathered around the fractured lattice, their eyes reflecting the broken gold of the engine. They'd struck to reclaim their rage, and instead had torn open something far beyond their control. We didn't mean, one of them stammered. The ground split before she could finish. Shadows erupted upward, tendrils of cold darkness slicing through steel like paper. The abyss didn't care for their justifications. It only wanted what had once been denied. Everything. Harrow stumbled back, staring as the tendrils twisted into shapes that should not exist. Whispers clawed at his mind. Faces of the dead. The cries of his unit. The promise of vengeance. The abyss didn't speak with words. It spoke with wounds. "We can control it," Harrow gasped. But the abyss laughed. A sound like metal scraping bone. The city of ash rises above. The survivors awoke to a sky ripped apart by shadow and light. Columns of black energy towered upward, wrapping around the engine like a serpent. Sirens wailed across the camps. Human and Cathari soldiers flooded the streets, weapons drawn, not against each other this time, but against a storm that felt alive. Colonel Vega raced to the core, Osi beside her, every footstep hammering against the trembling ground. "It's Harrow," Ose said through clenched teeth. "No," Vega replied, voice like steel. "It's what's behind him." The engine roared, golden light trying to hold its shape against the abyss. But it was losing. Without Arlen's stable presence, the lattice was nothing but a cracked heart. And then, a whisper. "Vega," she froze. That voice, broken, distant, echoed from within the collapsing engine. I'm not gone." The voice of the dead Vega stepped onto the dais as golden energy licked at her boots. The world blurred. The war, the graves, the faces of the fallen, all bled into one. She saw him, Arlen Thorne, or what was left of him. His form was made of fractured light, his edges fading and returning like a memory trapped in static. The man who once smiled at death now stood at the precipice of eternity. "The engine is failing," Vega said. "No," Arlen replied softly.
We are failing.
The dawn was never the light. It was the choice. And now they've chosen fear. Vega clenched her fists. "Then we make them choose again." Arlen's broken smile returned, the same one he gave before he walked into the storm. "That's why I trusted you." The rally Vega stepped outside, the golden glow behind her bleeding into the night. Soldiers, human and Cathari alike, turned as she climbed the wrecked steps of the council plaza. Shadows loomed behind her like tidal waves. "You all see it," she shouted over the storm. "That darkness isn't alien. It isn't human. It's everything we swore to rise above: fear, hate, division." Her voice cut through the wind. "Arlen gave everything so this world could live. I won't let it die in silence. Stand with me." One by one, weapons were raised. First a handful, then hundreds. Cathari war chants echoed alongside human shouts. The world that was once divided was now united against the abyss, and in that moment, the dawn engine responded. The flickering gold surged once more, fed not by technology, but by human resolve. The battle of last light. The abyss struck like a storm. Shadows slammed into the front lines, twisting into monstrous shapes, the reflections of nightmares. The soldiers fired, energy bolts cutting through darkness, but the void kept coming. Cathari spear formations locked with human mechanized units. Plasma burned. Steel sang. The battlefield turned into a storm of gold and black. Harrow, standing at the heart of the chaos, screamed into the storm, part defiance, part regret. The abyss wrapped around him like a crown of smoke, whispering promises of power. "They abandoned you," the darkness hissed. "I can end them." Harrow lifted his weapon. His hands shook. He could surrender, or resist. And for the first time he remembered Arlen's last smile, the way it wasn't hate that burned in that man, but belief. Harrow turned the rifle, on the abyss. "No," he said through gritted teeth. Not again. He fired into the core of the shadow. The engine roared back to life. Arlen's last stand inside the lattice, Arlen felt the pull. The abyss was clawing at his essence, dragging him down. But when V,